Today we're taking a look at the Patek Nautilus, because why get a house when you can get one of these? Now I'd like to give my usual big thanks to Ken Watches, because they're the ones who let me get hands-on with this piece and almost all the cool watches on the channel. They're a watch dealer in Hong Kong, and you can check them out at kenwatches.com. The link's also in the description. So about a year ago, I made a video on the Patek 5711 Nautilus, and I found that really disappointing. The watch, not the video. I like my own videos, of course. Now I want to briefly touch on this because it's quite important in terms of a comparison to the 5980, as my major problem with the 5711 was that it felt really flimsy and dainty and delicate in the hand. This is very much not a sports watch in the true sense, because it doesn't really have the characteristics and, you know, the prowess to be used in that context. It does have a screw down crown, but apart from that, I really think most dress watches feel a lot more solid in the hand than this. I was really expecting at least the bracelet to feel the way it looks. It looks really nice and solid, but the metal is quite thin, so it does feel a little bit jangly and quite subpar, I'd say, to any Rolex bracelet, really. Now, this is not the same comparison because Rolex makes out-and-out sports watches, whereas this is something more delicate. It's meant to be more delicate. It's meant to be more design-focused and not use-focused, and that's why it's about 9mm thick, and the movement finishing is fantastic, but for the hype, I thought it's a very poor value. So that brings us on to the 5980. Now, the title and introduction of the video was kind of cheeky because I basically called it a house. And in terms of value, well, you can get houses for what this is going at these days. But the watch itself, I really find it quite different to the 5711 in ways that I didn't expect. The general design philosophy is quite similar, and that is evident, but this watch doesn't feel the same way. It's not the same level of daintiness. It feels a bit more solid. And actually, to me, it feels a lot more solid. Maybe it's not the case in reality, but for some reason, the added thickness and functionality with the pushers and just the overall case thickness increase makes this feel more substantial on the wrist. I'm not sure whether the bracelet is actually any different. The case of the 5980 is actually slightly larger than the 5711, so I guess it would be a good assumption to assume that the bracelet, where it connects at least, is a bit thicker. And also the links as well, they seem more solid. The design of the watch itself, to me at least, is a lot more desirable than the 5711. I didn't care for that aesthetic all that much because I frankly thought it was slightly boring, even though most of you may disagree. I just feel that way. And the way that the chronograph breaks up this dial, I think it's really something more special to behold. Now, the blue of the Nautilus dials, it's a nice blue when the light hits it right and when the light is good. But in most circumstances, it's very pale and dull looking. So keep that in mind when you see these watches in video and in pictures. It's probably not what it looks like on your wrist, because on the wrist you really have to be under direct sunlight for it to have that rich blue pop, which most circumstances don't lend themselves for. Now, before it seems like I don't like this piece, that's not the truth. It's just that there's so much content when it comes to these hyped Patek watches that when you actually experience it for the first time, having seen all of this content and news around it, it is undoubtedly a bit underwhelming. Now let's talk about what I actually love about this piece, and that's the movement. So this essentially is Patek's first in-house automatic chronograph. It's a flyback chronograph at that, and it's got a vertical clutch and column wheel selection. Now, these are some things that are quite desirable in chronographs, but you can get it a lot cheaper if you wanted to, and that's not the idea behind a Patek Philippe. So what you're really paying for is the movement finishing, the movement design, and the fact that this overall watch design has stood the test of time. You're also mainly paying for, well, high Swiss wages and the fact that everything is made by hand for the most part. Now, that's at retail. So, at the prices these are at today, I have no clue what you are paying for. You're paying for hype, but hey, the entire luxury world is based on exclusivity, so can't fault people for that. But then again, at 3 times, 4 times retail, it doesn't make all that much sense. But still, would you rather get this or a house? Well, depending on the area you live in. So this is, I think, a lot smaller and easier to maintain than a house, and it's probably going to appreciate a bit more, at least in the short term, than said house. It is a silly comparison because no one's gonna take a look at these two things and be confused as to where they should put their investment. But I think it's funny, so I just thought I'd talk about that. Now, if we just set aside all those things for a second that involve investment, hype, and exclusivity, and we just looked at the watch objectively with, well, my subjective opinion of it, I think it's a pretty cool piece on the wrist. It's a bit larger than you'd expect because of that integrated bracelet. It does extend the lug to lug distance by a fair margin, so keep that in mind. It's not as small as the 40.5 millimeters would suggest, but I love the size. I think it's fantastic. I like the thickness. 12.2 millimeters is also really nice for a chronograph like this with, well, a see-through case back. And the movement and finishing, that's where this watch excels. What Patek does so well is make it look beautiful whilst being moderately functional. Now, these movements are not the most accurate movements you could get, and they're not the most advanced in terms of their features either. But the thing is, there's a lot of actual craftsmanship that you're able to see, and that's what makes the brand kind of precious, along with the fact that they produce watches in very limited amounts, and it's also the hype that makes the watch better. So to conclude, is this a good alternative to buying a house? Well, in the short term, yeah, sure. And in terms of convenience, very much so. So you could get this technically. I'm not recommending this at all, but you could buy this, keep this for a few months, and just sell it off for maybe 10% profit. And that's pretty insane when you're considering a piece that's already above 100 grand. Now that's the video. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, you'd probably like this video recently on the Lange. And if you like my content, then do subscribe. It means a lot to me. See you next video. Cheers.